Hello! Hi! Hello everyone, my name is Nicola Chang. In this session we'll be covering sound design and composition for theatre. Really massive thank you to the King's Head for organising this and inviting me to take part in this. Cool. Throughout this entire process, please feel free to ask any questions and just type it out. Raise your hand. All good. Cool. And hello everyone. Welcome to this live session on sound design and composition for theatre. My name is Nicola Chang. I am an associate. Hi. Hello. Hi. I'm an artistic associate of the King's Head Theatre. I've performed at the King's Head with Fat Rascal Theatre Company as a performer and as a musical director, and I've also sound designed and composed music for two shows at the King's Head Theatre. Which are for reasons that may remain unclear, and also high writing. And I think my first show at the King's Head was in 2017, so it's been quite a while now actually. And I would credit the theatre with starting off my career in theatre. Didn't really, yeah. So I am a sound designer and composer. I'm just gonna kind of make sense of this technology here. Cool. Hello. Hi. Yes. So, a bit about me. I've been playing music since I was about 5 or 6. I started playing piano and percussion, and then went to uni for economics and international relations. I thought I was going to be a consultant. It didn't work out. Then I moved to London about 5 years ago to just on a one-way ticket to pursue a career in music, really. So I got into theatre in quite a roundabout way. Then I started off in London with a desk job in a music company. At that time, I was just doing a lot of music for small pub theatre gigs and also short films. And in 2016, went fully freelance as a performer. So I performed a Stomp for a bit, and then now, my first theatre gig was at the Lion Unicorn Theatre in Kentish Town. And I went into sound design composition when I was performing with Stomp as a side gig in theatre, and then eventually it became the work got more work, and eventually became a full-time gig, which I now do. How to get started in the industry? I think in terms of skill set, I got to where I am now by a lot of self-learning and just really doing. So learning through doing. I'm mainly self-taught as a self-designer and composer. So I self-taught myself a lot of Logic software, self-taught myself QLab. And so learning through doing and watching other people do work, watching a lot of other shows. So I'm a big, massive fan of that. Day-to-day life of a sound designer. Depends. So what I think I need to clarify first, when people look for sound designers, they actually look for a person with a breadth of skills. So there's sound design for musical theatre. Sound design for musical theatre and West End shows is a completely different creature from sound designing a small pub theatre gig or even a theatre performance, really. So as a sound designer, for my skill set lies more in terms of sound designing and creating music and composing music for theatre shows. A day-to-day life would kind of be get up in the morning. I write really well in the morning, so I get up, run through some designs, program a bit of QLab, then I go to rehearsals, production meetings, and then in the evenings, if I could find the time, I'll usually watch some other theatre performance to kind of get up to date and really be able to reference other performances during meetings. But now, that was pre-COVID, so as a composer, I now work a lot in short films. I've been writing jingles, and that's just to keep my composition skills up and writing for short films as well. Okay, cool. That's a bit about me. At any time, do let me know if you have any questions, and yeah, it's really encourage you to join in the conversation. So sound design and composition for theatre. So a lot of things that I know now, I'm still learning. I really am. And again, mainly self-taught. So a lot of things that I'm going to talk about now are mainly things that I've learned through my experience. And it keeps ever changing. I'm learning new things through every single gig and every single day. again, like I mentioned, sound design for theatre is a very, very, very broad thing. You could be a sound designer if you are an outfitter, if you outfit sound systems, and you've watched Les Mis, for example, and how do you manage to get that mic sounding exactly there, and how do you manage to figure out the balance between the pit and the singers? That's sound design. If you go to, say, the National Theatre and you watch a performance and you have this amazing swell, amazing background music that really goes with a lot of scene changes, that is also sound design. But it tends to be quite, it's a very broad, all-encompassing role, and there are many, many skills involved in it. Um, for me, at this moment, I think effective sound design should do what a lot of other design elements and the script can't do. So, like, for example, lighting and costume and script and text and direction, and sound should effective sound design should support that, but simultaneously also be able to be an individual character and be able to do things that these design elements can't do. As a sound designer and composer, I'm really interested in shows where sound is a character in the sense that, like, actors and performers on stage interact with sound. So, for example, sound could be a metaphor or could symbolize the antagonist, and then that might be a track, a music that I, for example, bump up the bass or really emphasize or distort the male vocals in it, and then that could be a symbolism, a metaphor for the antagonist in the performance. So I'm really interested in that. I'm also interested in work that explores form and structure, and that just requires me to play with many dimensions of what the role requires, and that includes from anywhere from miking, creating reverb effects, to creating new content, writing, and designing soundscapes. I think as sound designer, for me, it's very important to be ahead. So, like, be on time, make sure you meet your deadlines, make sure your design concept is cohesive. So, ideally, you want your sound design to sound like one person did it. And most of all, you have to be yourself as a designer and as a composer and a content creator. So don't lose the essence of who you are as a designer. I think it's very important as well, because people hire you for the way you read a script, see a script, and then interpret it in your own way through the medium where you're best at. Yeah, and you need to be open and be flexible and be very dependable. A lot of my personal growth, really, in my career has been learning how to provide enough content and material for directors in rehearsal to experiment with and play around, but also in a way that is very malleable and flexible. I can make changes really quickly, but also be open to experimentation. Sound design essentially is covering, I think, an audience member's auditory journey from start to finish, and that's when they walk in, or maybe when they actually see the trailer for the show, but when they walk into the theatre to when they leave the theatre. And it covers anything in between, and that could include outfitting systems, outfitting a theatre for the most optimum sound effects. It could involve creating transition music and ambiances. Can involve creating sound effects. That's a natural sound effect: toilet flushing, birds. Live sound manipulation. So if you've got mics and you're able to manipulate instruments that play live or singers that speak live. Create audience walk-in, walk-out bows, ambiances. And then there's also a bit of admin work required that involves, for example, writing PRS forms, and that is filling out the admin work for any tracks or theatre shows that use music that already exists, like a Beatles track, for example. And then sometimes it extends beyond that. Like if your show ends up touring, how do you program your show and outfit your show best for that? And then occasionally you have to compose trailer music as well for shows. Cool. At any point, by the way, like questions, comments, concerns, wave your hands. I'm here. So what does it mean? No, tell you what, let's talk about the timeline of time. Let's talk about being a sound designer and the timeline of being attached to a show. So usually you meet for coffee or a meeting with the director or the producer, and in that meeting you want to have read your script and understood what the sound. Sorry, hang on. What is the first thing you did as soon as you finished education? Cool. W.R.K. Harris. I'll get back to you in a bit. cool. I'm going to talk about the timeline of a sound designer in the show, and then get back to you. So you want to find out what the sound of a show is, and then to see where, talk about any other references. For, if there were other theatre performances or theatre shows that you and the director or producer may both have seen that will influence this particular production. And what is the sound palette of the show? So you kind of want to find out what is it a primarily electronic score? Is it primarily punk rock? Is it or is it quite naturalistic? Is it quite reduced, quite minimalist? Then you probably would go for venue scout or venue rec. You can look at the theatre, look where the speakers are, figure out what the reverb is, how the room responds to sound. Have a look at understand the construction of the space, and also inquire about possible rigs, because if you're a sound designer and if you have that freedom and luxury, you'll be able to go and say, I want a speaker there, I want a speaker there. I once did a show where I creatively a lorry running through the stage from the back of the auditorium to the front of the auditorium, and because we couldn't afford a lorry, which is fair enough, we lined the entire that bit of the space with speakers, and then through key-lab created fades. And if you have the luxury being to do that, you kind of want to know quite straightforward, or you kind of want to know quite early on how that effect can be achieved. And also whether you need to hire more speakers from other companies, and what previous shows have been in the space that have used that space quite effectively. And then you go to read-throughs, so you understand the show as read by the actors. And then there's a rehearsal process, which you should kind of pop in and try things out towards maybe about 80% of the rehearsal process, or 70%. I like to pop in every now and then, bring some demos, bring some tracks, and try them out in the rehearsal space, see if it works. And then do load-ins and tech days, where you put the show, your QLab, pre-programmed QLab. If you have somebody to associate a program QLab for you, either way, there's a load-in and tech day, try things out, put lighting, put all the design elements in, and then that's the press, and that's your fantastic work. Cool. So, question from WRK Harris. So my phone's in landscape. What was the first thing you did as soon as you finished your education? I partied a bit, and then I went. So my bachelor's degree was in economics and international relations. The first thing I did was I went home and then tried consulting out. Did for 3 months, and then didn't work out. So went home. I grew up in Hong Kong. So I flew to London, and the first job I did was being a music data analyst for a music data company. So because I used to work for a firm called the Econest, which is behind the data that fuels a lot of Spotify recommendations. So when you turn on Spotify, turn on radio, you get certain tracks recommended to you, and that's powered by this company's data. The Econest's data. So I used to work for them. I worked for their counterpart or the competitor in London, and I worked there for 3 years. But throughout then, I've always kind of just like watched a lot of shows and reached out to a lot of different directors and did a lot of small pub gigs, sound design gigs. So I started in most of my early shows. I operated and designed and wrote at the same time. Yeah. And also wrote a lot of music throughout my failed consultant months. I think that is the first thing I did in education. I also ended up doing, when I was at my desk job, I also ended up doing a part-time master's in music, in classical music, in London. Cool. I mean, also run over some things that I found quite useful, some tips and tricks that people tend to use a bit. I do tend to use a couple of drones and tinnitus. Tinnitus is that when your ears ring, yeah, when someone fires a gun and your ears ring. But then a lot of different ways can manipulate, I think, audiences. I think as audiences, somehow we through many different ways of absorbing media and watching shows and watching films and understanding the world, collectively human beings can be quite tricked, and they can have their strings pulled a bit. So drones sometimes are typically used to underscore more darker moments, tinnitus to heighten the sense of tension. Yes, I also use a lot of sample packs and loops to create a sense of movement and underscoring shows. Let's run through hardware and software that tend to be used in theatre sound design. In terms of, so I'm very much a content creator. In terms of that, I create a lot of music. I create music. I create a lot of underscoring. I create scene transitions. I write a lot. I do a lot of remixes, and then I use software called Logic Pro primarily for that. And then QLab is a software of choice. It's for me, it's kind of like a very intelligent playlisting software. But then through QLab, you can also trigger lighting. You can trigger mixing desks, and that also opens up a world of opportunities, particularly with mixing desks. How you can manipulate live sound. In QLab, you can also trigger. You can also connect to Ableton, which again lets you do a lot of stuff with live miking and then audio effects. And in QLab itself, they also have a lot of audio plugins like reverb, basic ones like EQ, reverb, but even more advanced ones, which absolutely allow you to do a lot of things on the go and on the fly. So QLab will be software, and then there's some others. My expertise primarily lies very much in creating content and programming my content into the show, not so much with outfitting sound systems. But then there's other software systems that allow you to gauge a space and to effectively outfit it with the right speakers, and but that is not primarily very much where my expertise lies in at the moment in my career. Yes, so I'm going to talk about some shows that I've done where I think I've found a lot of my skills stretched, and I've learned a lot through the process. Show called Little Baby Jesus once at the Orange Tree Theatre, which I'm very proud of. That show for me called upon a wide breadth of skills. I've had to create original content, use sound effects, create sound effects, and also remix original songs to underscore the whole show. And then music was very much a separate character in the sense that all the three actors on stage interacted with sound, with gestures, so they could command. They could initiate a sound cue, or a sound cue could pull them to do certain things. And that is a show where I found, because there was such a wide breadth of difference sonically, acoustically, that to be able to make it sound like it came from the same person was quite challenging. Another show that I'm particularly proud of is a show called The Invisibles, which is at the Vaults this year. And that was that show was quite a QLab heavy show in the sense that there are two performers. Sorry, I backtrack. In that show, it's a bit of background. In that show, two performers who are basically in a situation where they are in a brothel, and then their pimp is always controlling them. But we had two female performers, and to symbolize the pimp calling them and yelling at them, I used a track called Gasolina. I don't know if you guys know the song. Well, so I took the opening of that and then looped it in QLab, and then as the show went on, that track would gradually more and more distorted, but only coming from one certain speaker in the house, which became a metaphor for the phone. So there are a lot of these kind of shows really interest me and excite me as a sound designer, where sound is not where you can kind of go beyond the breadth of naturalism and sound effects into establishing a certain language or a certain rule where sound is has dramatic function in the show. So there's another show called Lord of the Flies that I did at Greenwich Theatre, where a foghorn was in the foghorn. It was a violin that was stretched and auditorily and manipulated, fading away in the house through different speakers. Um, and in terms of speaker location, now mentioning that, I also find it like it's really exciting when you can see the direction of things that you're hearing. So I did mention the show before where I drove a lorry through the stage. I lined the space with speakers, and then faded in QLab, faded the lorry running through over 3 seconds over the space. And the show I did once, there was married with projection, where there were numbers going up the screen, but then the screen was about like 3 stories tall, and so I lined that bit with speakers as well. And so when the numbers would go up, ascending through 3 stories of a very, very tall projection screen, they will also be accompanied with a whoosh and some sound effects, but then that whoosh will be programmed to fade through 3 stories of speakers as well. And that was done entirely in QLab, which excites me a lot. And yeah, there are many, and in my career at the moment, I've worked in primarily theatre and sometimes some performance art, sometimes some sound installations, and gradually more in film. I find that that a lot of these different forms really cross influence each other, and I've always maintained that I think as a composer and as a sound designer, it's very important to, number one, watch a lot of work if you can, especially now when there's been so much stuff being streamed online that it's very, very. You learn a lot and you see how sound is being used in many fantastical ways, little tips and tricks, and also to keep performing other people's music. I find this all very important. At the moment, I am a MD, so for Six, a musical, and occasionally perform for them, but I also perform as a classical percussionist all over London, and kind of so I grew up listening to classical music and playing classical music, and it's always been, I suppose, a place of home, and it's always nice to keep performing and keep figuring out what worked best, what was successful historically. This sounds very, very vague, but performing and playing other people's things has always, I think, is very, very important, and to keep watching and to grow that way. Yeah, so we yes. Let's see. I could talk about, yes, No Baby Jesus. Shout out to Tristan as well, who I gather had done also a little King's Head Theatre Live show a while back. With also, I think as a sound designer, the sound designer and composer for theatre, it is very important for you to kind of know a show back to front. And for me, I think a lot of in my career, I found the shows that I'm most proud of, I've been able to had the time and had the energy to be with the show and to sit in with the show and to sit in the rehearsal process, understand how the director works with their actors and the performers, and how the vision could change from day one to the very end, and to be very flexible and to really get into the depths of what the show is really about and see what you can do with sound. Sometimes it's very common for people to say, "Oh yeah, design should tell the story," but I honestly really think besides telling the story, should do more than that. I think it should really brand, in a way, a kind of a sonic signature if possible into the show, and to sound cohesive. On the subject of sound as a different character, I've once done a show called Finishing the Picture at the Fimbra, where instead of Marilyn Monroe, I put in a saxophone as Marilyn Monroe's responses, because number one, it's really hard to portray Marilyn Monroe on stage, because Marilyn Monroe, just as I think it's equally difficult to portray James Dean on stage or on screen. And so one of my characters would speak to Marilyn Monroe, instead it would be saxophone lick that would come from the speakers behind the audiences, across the variety of moods, mainly avant-garde saxophone, and that by itself makes it sound cohesive, but also really goes with the jazz age element of that show. Cool. So we have 5 minutes left. And we a little reminder. So, any comments, questions, think it out. And yeah, let's see. We could talk about. I've got 5 minutes, and if there are any questions and questions, particularly in these 5 minutes, I'm more than happy to take them and to talk about any particular things that you'd like me to talk about more in detail. Now, if not, I will also quickly maybe just talk about mics. And actually, yeah, the variety of mic going from lapel mics and headset mics, and also cardio mics and rifle mics that I use a lot in sound design, and they have different patterns and they pick up sound in different ways, which you can manipulate through mixing desks. Oh, hang on one sec. I've got a question. WRK Harris. How do you contact directors? So I've got a question. How do you contact directors? Social media is very good for this, actually. I found a lot of my first gigs through social media, through Twitter, through shout-outs when people are looking for sound designers. I found it through Mandy. I found it through the artsjobs.org.uk. Those are a lot of my original gigs from there, and then gradually it grew into very much a word of mouth. Usually now I'm contacted by producers who ask for an AV check and ask if I'm available through a particular period. But yeah, and a lot of OV Connect is really good for it. Hashtag OV Connect on Twitter. So Twitter, Facebook, social media was where I first started, I think, which has been good to generate a network of contacts. It is a very contact-based industry, and so really, it's the best way to find work is to be able to have a body of work. Ironically, it's one of those chicken and egg things. Have a body of work where people can come see, and then if they like what you do, hopefully they'll be able to ask you to do the next one. Yeah. So I have 2 minutes remaining of this session. Cool. With any particular things that bring out? Otherwise, I'm gonna thank. Oh, cool. So, thank you all so much for joining. This is one of my first ever live sessions. And yeah, and just a reminder that King's Head Theatre Online is every weekday at 1 p.m. And if you'd like to check out the other King's Head Theatre Online sessions, you can check out King's Head Theatre on Twitter and theatre socials. Sure. Right, I've got a question. For a lot of people's way into the show is through listening to the soundtrack first. So can you give some examples of shows that tell a cohesive story really well through music? Example shows. For me personally, this question was, can you give examples of shows that tell a cohesive story really well through music? Yes, but my examples are more primarily geared in musical theatre, actually. No, and also recently I saw a show at the National. No, so I think big fan of Hamilton. I think Hamilton tells story really well through music, and it's very cohesive as well. Sonically, very acoustically cohesive. I really enjoyed Misty at Bush. I thought that was really well done. Recently saw Metamorphosis at the Royal Opera, by the Royal Ballet, and that again was because it was dance theatre. It was told primarily acoustically and musically, And so there was very effective demarcation between light and dark and soundscapes and use of repetition. So those are some shows that I recommend you check out. At the moment, Metamorphosis is still up until the 17th of May on the Royal. Yeah. Cool. Right. So this is it. This is our 30-minute. Cool. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope everybody has a lovely rest of your day. And do check out the other King's Head Theatre live and online sessions, which you can find out more details about on the King's Head Theatre socials. Thank you, everybody, and have a nice one. Take care. Now what?